Talk about the Chevy Chase show. I'm Tom Scioli, author of Godzilla's Monsterpiece Theater. Issue 3 is coming soon. It's Godzilla versus Dracula, among other things. So it's going to be pretty special. Keep your eyes out for it.
I'm Matt Zeoli.
I'd always heard how horrible the Chevy Chase talk show was. And I saw the first episode. Like when I was a kid, I saw the first episode. It was horrible. Like when he goes to put his hands in the cement and then he falls in the cement. That was funny. That's funny. I laughed. That was good. But I didn't really remember that part. The part I remembered that stuck with me, that became like the iconic part for the series and its dismissal, was Goldie Hawn standing like sitting 2 inches away from Chevy Chase and staring dead at him, singing, what a great face you have, like your beautiful face or whatever. And it's like, I wanted it to stop, but I guess I didn't want to like get up and but I remember watching it and I was kind of horrified by that, what I'd seen. And then, cut to a couple weeks later, the show's off the air.
Tom, I did a close watch. I was watching these with a microscope. When I was little on Route 30, there was that billboard with Chevy Chase. It said like filling in the late night gap.
Yeah, and he had like the Letterman
thing. That was up before the show.
Yeah.
And then it felt like it was up there. I would see that for like months and months.
After the show was like this famous flame out.
Well, it was for a year that billboard was up. I remember seeing that.
Like, I gotta say, watching it now, it's not as bad as like that part with Goldie Hawn singing to him. What is every bit as uncomfortable now, all these decades later. But the show as a whole, it's pretty funny. You do see a lot of hubris there. Like there's a lot of hubris, but then he'll sort of puff himself up, do hubris, and then he'll undercut it. Like it's kind of like after you're done watching it, you don't remember the joke at the end of the hubris. You just remember the hubris. So it's like, oh, I'm gonna get my hands put in cement, and so you remember all this blow, the puffing up of that, and then you don't remember the punchline. But the punchline is funny. But then he committed. Because the other thing you can compare this to is the Jerry Lewis talk show. There was a Jerry Lewis talk show in the 50s, and it was the same thing. And the big part of it was the Jerry Lewis Theater. And then it was like the Chevy Chase Theater. They christened it the Chevy Chase Theater. And that's a big part of the first episode, too, the hubris. The Chevy Chase Theater. And it's like, and so then when David Letterman moved to CBS, they could have, it was the Ed Sullivan Theater. And he could have and CBS probably said like, oh yeah, we'll change the name to the David Letterman Theater, and he was probably like, no. Like
it's a bad portent.
You don't want to be Jerry Lewis, you don't want to be Chevy Chase, so we're not going to call it the David Letterman Theater. Let's keep it the Ed Sullivan Theater, and that's true because that type of comedy, like if you puff yourself up and make yourself important and pompous, then the only thing you can be is the punchline. You can be the object of a joke, but you can't be the joker. Like a joker has to be coming from sort of like a self-deprecating point of view, and that
high stat. You don't want to be high stat.
Yeah, that was the big miscalculation on Chevy Chase's part.
Fox pumped so much money into that they put millions into renovating that theater for him.
Yeah, same as the Ed Sullivan Theater. Like the Ed Sullivan Theater was basically like destroyed. It was basically like complete junk like that, and that was like I also watched Dave Letterman's first episode on his first CBS episode, and it starts off with like a montage of putting together the Ed Sullivan Theater. But again, it reads differently if it's the Chevy Chase Theater as opposed to like the Ed Sullivan Theater.
And when I was doing my microscopic watch, he looked so nervous during that first episode.
Yeah,
I could tell he was like, and also on some of the when he would recycle his weekend update thing.
He does like a substantial.
He didn't rehearse. I could tell
a big chunk of it was weekend update. And looking back, it's like you could recut the Chevy Chase show into like a really good show. Like skip the part like he does this lengthy thing of them christening the new Chevy Chase studio. Cut that part out. Like just go straight to the weekend update stuff. Lean into the week. Of course, it's easy to say. It's easy to say now because we have the Daily Show and all that. Like there's a ton of like shows that are basically Weekend Update. But it's like when it takes a while for the show to get to Weekend Update, and when it does, it's kind of like, okay, here's his comfort zone. He doesn't stick with it very long.
And the stuff I did like, I like how he had his keyboard right at the desk. Like, that was pretty cool.
That's another ingredient of like hubris, though, is if you're like if you're rocking out and rocking too hard, because that was Alan Thicke. That was his downfall too. Like he'd like rock out a little too much, and like Chevy Chase, it's like even worse because he doesn't rock out. He's like a jazz player, so then he's like really
riffing,
grooving and stuff, and then he would do these things. It was like Ed Sullivan he would do these like almost like puppet shows where he'd like have his face. Like, he'd have this mime thing where it'd be his face against, like, a black background, and he'd be, like, harmonizing with himself. And it didn't really have a joke. It was just like, when the red robin goes, blah, 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 beep, 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 like,
went on forever.
Yeah, and it was like, this is, like, be funny, But it was self-indulgent, I think.
Totally, and he was he called in all his favors. Like,
he had some wattage, some major wattage, some major star power. The Goldie Hawn interview... Like, that was, like, the first interview, and that was probably a miscalculation because it was one of those things where they had such a history together that it was, like, it was all inside jokes, and so, like, you felt like you were on the outside watching these two people, and again, it felt a little bit skin-crawling because it's like, okay, we shouldn't be seeing this.
No.
And they'd all be, like, so, we weren't in on the joke. It was like, okay, these two, like... We need to change the channel so these two can have some time alone with each other. And then, like, later in the show, he interviews Whoopi Goldberg. And that was a good interview. That was funny. And not to... Like, the interview with Goldie Hawn was good. And getting, like, some... feeling... getting some inside... like, it could be cool having two people who, like, really know each other well interview each other. But, again, it's hard to make that work. Where, like, his talk with Whoopi Goldberg, again, she's very funny. You could see a vision of how this show could have endured, because it was a little more of, like, it felt a little more professional, like, a little more of, like, a standard.
They really pulled the plug, like, quick on it. I felt like they could have let it go a little long to, like, let stuff work out. Like, that was a quick,
I agree, too. They pulled the plug, like, and what we've learned looking back with, like, because the thing of, like, a late night talk show that wasn't Johnny Carson was like a very it was not, we've had a little more attempts at it since then, and they've kind of worked out how it works. And one of the big things, again, it was sort of the same thing with Conan, but one of the big things is you got to give the guy time. Like, Johnny Carson didn't become Johnny Carson on his first episode. Like, you got to give it a little bit of time. But Chevy Chase was so high profile, they were probably paying him a ton of money and stuff. And and they did hang him out to dry.
They really did, and like, 6 weeks on that format of a show is just not long enough.
Another thing you can compare it to is the Magic Johnson show, because like the Magic Johnson show,
I totally forgot about
was also like ill-fated, but it like Magic Johnson, had huge guests. He had a lot of famous friends. He's like a beloved celebrity and stuff, and so he had Arnold Schwarzenegger on his first episode, and so, like, Harrison Ford was on his second episode. Like, he had a lot of and same thing with Chevy. But it's like I think you do have to, like, approach these things with a certain amount of humility, which Chevy Chase did not have.
And once again, doing my microscope watch, like, anytime there was a guest that I felt that was like when Tom Selleck was on there, I could feel like Chevy Chase felt like threatened by Tom Selleck. Or Robert Townsend, who was so much funnier. Like, he was like, he felt threatened by his, like, chops.
Did you see the Jim Varney episode?
No!
You got to see that one. He had Jim Varney on Ernest, and you could tell, like, he didn't respect Jim Varney. You know what I mean? Like, again, he wasn't rude to him or anything, but you could tell it was, like, he might have even been bummed that, like, because it was later in the run. He was probably like, I start off with, like, Whoopi Goldberg and Tom Selleck, and now I got I got Hey Vern, like, and he's like 6 movies in to like the Ernest series,
I was afraid to watch like week 6 of the show, because by then I felt like it would be too cringe. He would know he's getting axed. It was like Dead Man Walking the last like
Yeah, I mean, again, I enjoyed this show. Like, I sort of skipped around a little bit, like from episodes, and again, just kind of like, oh, I want to see this one. So I wanted to see Jim Varney on it. Like, he could, like, you could tell he felt like he was above Jim Varney, like he was a higher echelon than Jim Varney. And meanwhile, it's like, you know, you can't shine Jim Varney's shoes. You know,
Yeah,
hey, Chevy Chase, you're no Ernest.
yeah, Chevy Chase can't carry Jim Varney's jockstrap.